Today we're going to talk about the art of the pitch. Here's what you can expect from this session. We're going to look at what is needed to have the most effective pitch. And of course, I'm going to tell you about Maluba Consulting Services. We're going to discuss preparation leading up to the pitch event. We're going to look at public speaking techniques with an emphasis on storytelling. We're going to talk about the science behind storytelling. We're going to discuss passion when it comes to pitching. We're going to talk about practice to help you prepare for your pitch. And we're going to look at a case study on storytelling by a journalist, Rob Walker. Maluba Consulting is all about empowering people and organizations to become agents of national economic growth through innovation and entrepreneurship. We cater for students, entrepreneurs, we cater for startups, especially those in the early stage, meaning pre-seed and seed stage. We cater for corporate organizations that are striving to become more innovative and many more services like that. I'd like to begin this session by asking you a question. What would you say is the most important aspect of any given presentation? Now, my answer, I'll be curious to know what your answer to this is, but my answer is it depends on the audience and what you hope to achieve, right? If you're pitching to investors, then of course, what becomes important about your presentations is going to vastly differ from if you're pitching for academic purposes, for instance, right? Public speaking, at the core of it, we're going to look at what makes what element constitutes the most important aspect of any given presentation. Now let's talk about preparation. What do you need to keep in mind when preparing for a pitch? Preparation begins way in advance. 3 weeks before the pitch day, 2 weeks before the pitch day, 1 week, 1 day, the day of the pitch, a few hours before, a few minutes before. What do you do to get you ready to deliver a world-class pitch? The first thing to keep in mind is something known as M analysis. M is acronym for audience intent and message. Here I'm giving you one comment. Thou shalt know thine audience. You must know your audience. Never go to pitch anywhere without knowing who you'll be talking to, without knowing what age they are, what age category, without knowing about a bit about the background of the people. It's very dangerous, right? It's always good to do a quick research, to ask, inquire about the audience to whom you'll be delivering your presentation, your pitch. Okay? So that's the importance of audience. Then there's intent. Okay, what's your call to action? What's your intention? Are you asking for money? Do you want to, if you're pitching for investment, do you want to turn the audience or your listeners into ambassadors for your brand? What's the intent here? It's always important to have that in mind while preparing for your pitch. Okay. And last but not least, the message. What is the message that you want people to remember? What you want the message to people to be able to tell other people as they walk out of this pitching session? What message do you want them to remember? And that's very important. So keeping these three elements in your head, audience intent message, is going to be very crucial when it comes to preparing for the pitch. But you will notice that we will bring this up even during your pitch presentation. So you keep this in mind even as you're delivering your pitch, as you're presenting and talking to people. You're keeping in mind your audience, you're keeping in mind the intent of your pitch, why are you here, and you're keeping in mind the message, what do they want, what do you want them to learn. Next, we want to talk about becoming an expert on the topic that you'll be presenting. Preparation breeds confidence. Most people tell you they're nervous before they're about to engage in a public speaking event. Sometimes they're nervous for the wrong reasons because it could be nerve-wracking. But also it comes from a place of insecurity, not being sure about oneself. But the more you prepare on the topic, the more knowledgeable you are, the more confident you are that you're going to deliver, that you have something worth sharing, that you have something that people should listen to. That confidence comes from intense, increased knowledge on the topic that you'll be delivering. You're basically becoming an expert. You should know a little bit more on the topic than the average person in the room. So that's the idea here. And all of this, it needs to be included in your preparation to help you be ready to deliver the best pitch that you can ever deliver. The next thing, obviously, that you need is you need tools to help you do that. And one of those tools is a pitch deck. How do you build a world-class pitch deck? For me, a world-class pitch deck, it's about keeping it short, 10 slides or less, concise, hard-hitting, impactful, right? And usually on the 10th slide, I like to include the following elements. The problem, that will be your slide number one. What is the suboptimal situation that you've identified? The suboptimal world in which your target users are living at the moment. Then the next slide would be your value propositions. What would be the optimal world if your solution was implemented? Then you want to talk about customer insight. What have you learned from doing your customer discovery? If you don't know about customer discovery, I encourage you to check my video on design thinking, a business building tool. We go at length on empathizing or customer discovery. Then you want to talk about market size, how big of the market it is, and how much of that market do you intend to capture. Then you want to talk about competitive analysis. Who are your competitors, direct or indirect competitors? What can you learn from them? What makes you different from them? What makes you better than them? You also want to have a slide on traction and revenue model. You want to have a slide on team. Why are you the right team to solve this problem? Even if we validated the hypothesis that this is a problem worth solving, but why should you entrust you with this responsibility? You need to talk about your secret sauce here, right? Assuming that you're pitching to investors, you want to make them understand that you are the best person, the best team to invest in. Then you want to present the path to success. Where are you on your entrepreneurial journey? How long is it going to take you before you break even? What are the key milestones that you're going to achieve in the next 6 months, in the next 2 years, and so on and so forth? Then you want to have a slide on call to action, especially when you're landing. You've had perhaps 3 minutes to pitch, 5 minutes to pitch, very good pitch. You captivated the audience, people understood the message. What now? What do you want people to do with this information that you've just shared with them? What is the call to action? Do you need them to reach into the wallet and invest into your business? Do you need them to contact you so that they can mentor you? Do you need them to become brand ambassadors and go and tell the world about your business, about your brand? What's the call to action here? Very, very important. Then you want to finish with a thank you slide. It might seem trivial, but it's very important. Say thank you to people for listening to you. Now, in terms of designing your pitch deck, you want to make it visual, right? Slides should be almost all pictures with as little writing as possible. If you have words on the screen, then no one is listening to your words, they are reading. And at that point, they are disengaged from your presentations. You've lost the room, you've lost the crowd, you're no longer in control. You want to make people feel feelings. Humans love stories. And we're going to talk in depth about storytelling. We want to feel emotions. Find the right balance to grab heart and head in that order. Then what you need to do is make sure that there are no mistakes. No detail is small. Never, never make a grammatical or spelling error. Ensure everything lines up perfectly. Be aggressive in your attention to detail. You're asking people for the money. The least you can do is show that you are trustworthy. And it's the smaller things, it's the little things that can make someone not trust you, that can make someone doubt your ability, doubt what you're capable of doing. Respect the time that's allocated to you. Practice over and over and over again until your pitch is exactly allotted, the allotted amount of time. Don't go over, don't leave time on the clock. And this comes with practice. Now, most people would say this is all good and well, but When it comes for me to go on stage, I get nervous and I don't know what to do. How do we overcome nervousness before pitching or while going on stage? There's, of course, a lot of techniques, a lot of things that one can do, but there are things to consider. Like I said, during your preparations, 1 week before, a few days before, the day of the event, a few hours before, a few minutes before, there are things that you can do to help you be in a head space where you feel comfortable, you feel ready to step out and speak boldly about your ideas, about your business, and so on. So you want to practice often as you can. I cannot overemphasize this. Preparation breeds confidence. The more you practice, the more you feel comfortable. And here we're talking about grab a mirror, practice in the mirror, use a stopwatch, right? Practice with friends. And as you're practicing, try to imagine yourself on stage. Try to imagine yourself engaging with the audience. That's why it's important to know your audience in advance, right? Try to imagine yourself delivering a powerful speech and practice that. Practice as often as you can. There are breathing techniques that you can do, inhaling and exhaling just to calm yourself down. One of my go-to every time before going on stage or delivering a keynote speech, I usually like to listen to music. A soothing tune puts me in a relaxed mode and I'm calm, I'm collected, I'm ready to go. One of my favorite motivational speakers, Les Brown, said once that he used to do 100 up to 100 push-ups to get ready, to get hyped before he goes on stage. That adrenaline level shoots up and is ready to overcome his fear and his nervousness. Find what works for you, right? And apply that. You can customize that to your own style. And during the pitch, it can start that you start with confidence and then all of a sudden you get nervous. Maybe something happens, the slide is not working anymore, the pointer is not working, and you get nervous. At that point, I like to encourage you to just pause. Pause. No need to rush, just literally pause and remind yourself, what is my aim? In other words, audience intent message. What's your audience? You know what you know your audience, what's intent, what do you want to achieve, and what's the message. That's how. Paul, remember that and deliver that. Keep going, right? Reframe anxiety. You will notice that the more anxious you get, your crowd also the more your crowd also becomes anxious because they see you and it reflects on, it rubs off on them. So you want to reframe anxiety. Look at the crowd not like a bunch of strangers, but look at them as a group of friends that you're taking on an adventure, on a journey, the journey about your business, the journey about your story. Imagine taking them on a hike. You know where you're going. You making sure that nobody is left behind. You guiding them. You taking them there. So that's the idea. Sometimes I like to tell people that offer crowd participation because as the crowd start engaging with you, they feel more comfortable. They feel less like spectators, but more like actors. And the more relaxed they are, the more relaxed you're going to be. All right. So now you need to also have passion when delivering your pitch, right? Passion is very important. Again, imagine you pitching to investors, but there's no passion in what you're saying. No matter how calm and collected you are, people are going to doubt how invested you are in what you are saying. And remember, when it comes to investors, people don't hardly invest into the product, the service. They invest into the entrepreneur. They invest in the individual. They invest in you. It's your passion that's going to captivate them. How is the problem relevant to you? Why is this problem important to you? Talk with passion. Talk from a place of passion. Why are you the right team to tackle this problem? All of those things. And of course, one way to talk with passion can be manifested in your body language. And so make sure you look presentable. Make sure you took time. You don't have to wear a tie or be extremely formal, but look neatly, right? Make sure that you're taking this thing seriously. Look presentable. And as you stand balanced and tall, right? Your feet facing forward, your hands above the waist, especially when you're starting welcoming the crowd in. make eye contact, deliberate movement, and pace yourself. So I'm going to go over these points a little bit slowly. Presentation, it's all about how you feel directly impacts what you do. If you feel good, you do good. I'm sure you've heard this saying. In terms of your posture, it conveys a certain message. You don't want to convey a message of being nervous, being timid, being scared, being afraid. What you want to convey is a message of being sure of yourself, a message of authority, a message of confidence. It makes people trust you. It makes people more engaged. It makes people more focused and want to listen to you because you are sure of yourself. And this, you can read it in someone's body language just by the way they're standing. And that's very important. Feet facing forward. So as you start your pitch, open arms, welcome the crowd in. Welcome with open arms and try to keep your hands above your waist. All right. I mean, if you are Steve Jobs, sure, you can keep your hands in your pockets. But until you become Steve Jobs, make sure, right, you try to adhere to these principles. And so eye contact is not about looking across the street, the room like a mad person. It's about locking eyes with one person. Make sure you finish the sentence before you move to the next person. Say the next sentence. Make sure you finish that sentence before you move to the next person, and so on and so forth. And also, your movement must be deliberate. You're not just rocking back and forth. People are going to be dizzy. I've literally heard people say that speaker was rocking so much that I felt like I got seasick. Right? So be planted and be deliberate with your movement. If you have to turn to point something on your slides, on the screen, something, be deliberate, right? Move with authority and place yourself. Don't turn your back to your audience. Place yourself in a position in such a way that you can point at the thing and still look at your audience. In terms of pacing yourself, it's also about how fast you're speaking, the intonation going up and down. Especially if you're presenting online, for instance, and you have your camera off, all people have is your voice. And if you're speaking with a monotone voice the whole time, you can easily put them to sleep. Going up and down can also determine and capture the attention of the listeners, right? You don't want to be going with a monotone voice the whole time. And you don't have to rush. The problem is that when they tell you that you have 3 minutes to pitch and you have 15, 20 slides, 30 slides, you want to go through all those slides and you start rushing. You look nervous, the audience look nervous, and all of a sudden nobody's engaged in what you're saying, nobody's listening to you, nobody remembers your message and your intent. Everything is lost. And that's why I advise you to have 10 slides or less and pace yourself. It's okay to pause. There's no such thing as awkward silence. Pause, collect your thought, continue, right? Avoid filler words like, so. It makes you sound dumb. And even if what you're saying is very intelligent and very informed, but the delivery might make people feel like you don't know what you're talking about, right? So there's a way of speaking with a certain cadence. People want to continue listening to you, and people kind of trust what you're saying. Then that's very important. All right. And having said that, I want us to look a little bit about public speaking techniques that can help you engage your audience. There are obviously various public speaking techniques out there, but I really want to talk to you about 4 elements to incorporate in your public speaking, namely engagement, transportation, relevance, and influence. When we're talking about engagement, we're talking about our ability to physically be present. As I've mentioned earlier on, the use of poses, the tone of your voice, hand gestures, eye contact, and posture. Then we have transportation. The listener is constantly trying to triage information based on what makes sense or not. We'll talk a little bit more on this in the coming slide. It's aimed at building trust between the story, the storyteller, and the narrative being told. Then you have relevance. It's all about aim, audience intent, message. Imagine you speaking for 30 minutes, right? And you want people to remain captivated to what you're saying. Even 3 minutes, it's a lot of time to be speaking to someone, to have somebody's attention. And the way you ensure that you have the attention is making it relevant to them. What's in it for them? What's in it for me? Why should I sit here instead of being on my phone scrolling on social media? giving you my attention, what's in it for me, right? And this results in an acceptance or outright rejection of whatever you say. Then you have influence. Here, of course, you're trying to influence people. You want them to reach into their pocket, to give you money, or to take actions, or do certain things. It's not just about behavior, but also about attitudes, beliefs, and knowledge. You don't come here telling them, I know better. You don't what you don't know is wrong. You're not here to try and correct them. You're here to refrain, present a parallel stream of their beliefs. I believe there's a different way of approaching these solutions. I believe there's an innovative way of doing these things, a different way, right? And that's how you wanna approach that. So now I want us to go back a little bit to storytelling. We've touched a little bit on incorporating storytelling in our public speaking, in our pitch, but let's try and understand a little bit of the science involved in storytelling. In most of my presentations, I try to make sure that there's a story that's included there. That's why even in most of my sessions, I make sure there's a case study that I can tell you a story. I can make it interesting for you. I can make it relevant to you as well. And we will see why this is important. When you're telling the story, you're inducing certain hormones into people, certain chemicals that reacts that's happening inside of us, and it can cause people to engage or disengage. And we are all familiar with dopamine, right? The feel goods hormone, right? The dopamine can be induced into your listeners, into your audience with intention, right? Intentionally. What it does is it builds suspense and it launches a cliffhanger. Most stories have most stories induce this hormone, and the effect is that the listener is more focused. There's greater motivation, and there's memory increase. This you see this in movies. The main character has been shot. Now you're wondering, is he going to survive? Is he going to die? What's going to happen to his family? And so on and so forth. And that's the end of the first series. Tune in next time. Of course, next time you want to come, you want to see what's happening. And that's the dopamine that's been induced in you. There's also another hormone that is oxytocin. It's the same hormone that a mother carrying a baby in the womb induces into them. It creates empathy. It makes you feel human. How you induces this is by being vulnerable to your audience, telling a story, right? That make them feel human. And the effect of this is they feel more. Your audience, your listeners feel more generous. They trust you, and there's a certain bond that's being created there. I give you an example. One of the entrepreneurs that I've worked well, I've come across in the past delivered a pitch at some point, and his whole startup was about manufacturing devices that help detect certain type of cancer at a very early stage. And he tells a story of how he came about that idea. And the story is all about his cousin dying of cancer because it was not diagnosed early. And at the funeral, he said to himself, he remembers as he was mourning, he said to himself, if this thing had only been diagnosed sooner, this would have not happened. At that moment, he vowed to himself to make sure that this doesn't happen to someone else, to dedicate his life to finding a way to help people diagnose this type of cancers at a very early stage to prevent death. And all of a sudden you can see you can feel his pain. You can understand where this is coming from. You feel a certain chill in your spinal cord. That's oxytocin being induced in you as you're listening to this story. And all of a sudden you feel more generous. If that person says, I need your money to pursue this venture, chances are if you have money you will give him money. Because you trust him, because there's a certain bond that's been created. And that hormone has been induced by him simply being authentic, genuine, and vulnerable before you. It's a technique that you can manipulate as a public speaker to captivate your audience. The other hormone that I want to talk about is endorphin. Endorphin is a hormone that makes people laugh, right? It You can crack a joke. There's various ways you can make people laugh. You can crack a joke. You can play a funny video. You can show a funny picture. You can show a cute picture and whatnot. But when you make people laugh, the effect is that there's increased creativity. People are more relaxed. There's increased focus. And you want that. The more your audience is relaxed, the more you are relaxed, the more they are receptive and more engaging to whatever you say. And the more creative everybody becomes. And the more focused they are. And if they focus, they're paying attention to you. And if they're paying attention to you, the probability of them remembering what you're saying is also increased. There's also some hormones that I'd like to encourage you to avoid as a public speaker is inducing cortisol and adrenaline. The effect of these hormones is that there's high increase in intolerance. People become more irritable and creative, critical, memory impaired, and prone to make bad decisions. How do you induce this hormone? I'll give you an example by saying something highly controversial. Maybe it could be something about race. Maybe it could be something about gender, something that's going to stir the pot. All of a sudden, people feel irritated and people, there's cortisol and adrenaline that's been induced in them. Some may argue that you can still use that to advantage, but I would not rather want to work with someone who's irritated, uncreative, whose memory has been impaired and prone to make bad decisions, even though they're more engaged. So that's, I wouldn't want to have that, right? Now, you might tell me that, look, this is all good and well, but I'm not good at storytelling. I beg to differ. Everybody can learn how to become a good storyteller. It's not for a select few. You just need to start by believing that you can tell a story. Then you can be structured about it. Write down the story before you actually tell it to people. You can index those stories to make sure that at this moment, what I want to induce as hormone is oxytocin. At this moment, I want to induce dopamine. At this moment, I want to induce endorphin, for instance. And I'll tell a joke. I'll say this now. I'll be genuine here. I'll be vulnerable. You can structure it. You can index it. You can practice it to a point where it becomes second nature to you. Now, I want us to look at what happens in our brains when we're engaging with people in general to understand the power of a story and the power of storytelling. I'm going to read you a story. And I want you to kind of think for a few seconds what do you think this story means before I continue. You can even pause the video and try to think what this story is about before I tell you what the story is about. Here it goes. He went to the store. John died. Kate went hungry and wept. Usually, when I tell this story and I ask people, what do you make of it? The response that I get from people usually is that, well, John and Kate are married and they were on the last money. So John went to the grocery store to buy food, and when John got to the grocery store, he got shot, and because he died, Kate went hungry and wept. And people would have different interpretations of this story, and then I'll ask them, but where exactly did you read all this? I didn't say any of that. But what happens? What happens is that your brain has been trying to connect the dots. Your brain, as you read this and it's not making sense, there's no logical flow, your brain tries to make it flow logically for you, right? Because our brains are predisposed to think in story terms and in story structures. This impacts how we understand things, how we make sense of things, and what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget. There's a whole study and books written by a guy called Evan Kendall. You can check him out to learn a bit more in depth about this. But what you need to know is that there's such a thing called the neurostory net that needs to satisfy the make sense mandate of our brain. It manipulates information in order to force it to make sense. Information comes at us disjointed, disorganized, and so if the brain tries long enough to connect the dots and make sense out of it and doesn't succeed, the result is that it's going to tell you, let's disengage. Let's rather go on iPhone, let's open up social media, let's scroll, and let's find something that makes more sense. And at that point, you've lost the crowd, you've lost your listener. So your job, but Kendall Heaven says this, your job as a storyteller is to help people connect the dots. You want to let them wander just long enough to keep them engaged and captivated but not too long to a point where they disengage. And that it comes with a juggling act. It comes with practice, right? Some people are naturally good at it, but you can practice this and become good at it. I want us to go deeper and look at the case study to really understand the power of the power behind storytelling, the power behind storytelling, and everything can be practiced. I like this saying by the US Navy SEALs that you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your training. The more you practice, the more confident you are, and when you find yourself in a certain situation, is your training that's going to back you up. Now let's look at a case study. So in 2009, there was a journalist, a man called Rob Walker. He really wanted to explore this idea of storytelling and test if it's truly powerful. So he asked himself this question: is storytelling really the most powerful and effective communication tool? So he devised a plan to test this. He went on eBay and bought 200 items. The average price of each item was about $1. Then he contacted 200 authors and he said, look, I'd like you to join me in a creative exercise. I want you each to pick an item and write a story that's not necessarily real, right? It could be fictitious, but write a story about the item, the artifact that you choose. And they all agreed. So he had 200 authors that each wrote a story about one of the items that he got from eBay. So he ended up with 200 items, this time with a story. So what he did now to test his theory, he went back to the same platform where he bought those items to begin with, and he now posted them. He sold them this time around with a story. This is an example of such an artifact. This horse's head was one of those items that he got from eBay. He bought it at 99 cents, but sold it at 62 US dollars with a story. That's a 6,395% increase. Was this a one-time thing? Not really. The total purchase cost of the 200 items was 129 US dollars. The total sale of the 200 items with a story was 8,000 US dollars. That's insane. That's the power of storytelling tested and proven right there. And so as we're discussing today the art of the pitch, the reason why I spend so much time talking about storytelling in your public speaking techniques is because I want to encourage you to incorporate storytelling in your pitch, regardless of what it is. If it's a 3-minute pitch, 30-minute pitch, 1 hour, you want to let's look at the example of you pitching for 3 minutes to investors for a business. Introduce a story, introduce the persona. This is Sarah, a 32-year-old woman, right? You present the world in which she lives. You present the problem with Sarah included. You give a story, a suboptimal world of Sarah. Then you explain your value propositions or how Sarah would live in the optimal conditions on the optimal world if your value proposition was implemented. Then you continue with your story. You can even talk about how you relate to Sarah and why these problems it's at your heart, why you want to solve this problem for Sarah. When you're talking about your market size, you can say things like there are 8,000 Sarahs in these regions, and we want to cater for them. Right? All of a sudden, there's a story, and it's continuous and it's consistent. The most mistake that I see people make here is that they will introduce the story and then they drop it. They present the story in the problem in the problem statement and the value proposition, and then they go to market size, market analysis. They start talking about general people, but continue with the persona, the same story that you started with all throughout your presentation to keep your audience engaged. And that's what I mean by remaining consistent with the character throughout your presentation. And again, nobody is perfect at this. What you need to do is practice, perfect, practice, perfect, practice, perfect, and so on and so on. And you keep on doing that. I hope you've enjoyed this session. I hope you've learned something about the power of storytelling incorporated in your public speaking skills. I hope you've learned some practical techniques that you can use next time you stand in front of a crowd, next time you stand in front of people to pitch, whether it be for a business, whether it be for academic purposes, whatever that may be. I hope you've learned some useful and practical skills. I really want to thank you for your time. Please make sure you connect with us if you want to engage further. My email address is daniel@malobaconsulting.com. Make sure you get in touch with us, leave a comment, and don't forget to like, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you and see you next time.